The call came on a gray Tuesday morning. Her father had collapsed in the backyard, dead before the ambulance arrived. There was no time for complicated grief, just logistics. She flew back to the small New England town she'd left at 19, a carry-on bag and a knot in her stomach. The house was just as she remembered it. White clapboard, green shutters faded from salt air. But it wasn't hers anymore, not even partly. Her mother met her on the porch with a long hug and watery eyes, but the warmth felt distracted, like her mind was elsewhere. It didn't take long to find out why. Over tea that evening, her mother mentioned it casually, like it was a detail in a weather report. The house had already been sold. Not listed, not appraised. Sold. To Eddie, she said, eyes flicking away. Eddie was 15 years younger, a local contractor with sunburned skin and an easy smile. He'd helped with the kitchen remodel 2 years ago and never seemed to leave after that. Her mother called it a second chance at happiness. The daughter recognized something else entirely. His name was already on the mailbox. She said nothing, just nodded. Arguing wouldn't help. She knew how her mother operated, soft denial wrapped in stubborn hope. That same soft denial that had once told her to ignore bruises from a high school boyfriend, to be the bigger person, when a neighbor's son stole her scholarship application and mailed it with his name instead. Her mother had always mistaken silence for grace. The daughter had learned to leave rather than fight. But now there was no leaving. Not yet. She rented a small, crooked cottage half a mile from the house, technically still in town, but tucked far enough into the trees that it felt private. Her job allowed remote work. Her grief gave her a reason to stay. She didn't say it aloud, but something told her this wasn't about the house. It was about the years she'd missed, the conversations she'd never had, the versions of her mother she hadn't known, and maybe, just maybe, about saving what was left. Eddie didn't gloat, exactly, but he didn't hide either. He was around constantly, fixing gutters, drinking beers in the yard, tossing little barbs about how her mother finally had someone who really appreciated her. His tone was always just light enough to be defensible, just pointed enough to cut. She started going to the farmer's market again, wandering through the old bookshop where her childhood friends had once loitered. Some recognized her, others didn't. But the town hadn't forgotten everything. People talked, especially over coffee, especially when she didn't press too hard. She heard things, whispers, rumors. There had been another woman, widowed, older, who had given Eddie a car. Another who deeded him a lakeside cabin, now foreclosed. Each time, Eddie had emerged untouched. She listened. She smiled politely. She made notes, mentally at first, then in a quiet, encrypted file on her laptop. Her mother, meanwhile, seemed more fragile than she remembered. Laughing too loud at Eddie's jokes, apologizing for forgetting her daughter's favorite coffee, brushing off financial talk with an airy, "It's all taken care of now." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There were new lines on her face, but still, she defended him. And so, the daughter didn't fight. Not directly. Not yet. She just planted a small garden behind her rental cottage, digging into the rocky soil like it was therapy. And every evening, as the sun dipped below the treetops, she'd look toward the house that used to be hers and wait. The first real break came not from gossip, but from paperwork. She'd walked into the municipal office on a Thursday under the pretense of updating her voter registration. The woman behind the counter had known her since kindergarten and still called her sweetheart. They exchanged small talk, weather, loss, the state of the post office, and just before she left, she casually asked if the records for the house sale were public yet. The clerk hesitated. You mean the one your mom sold? She nodded once. Bit odd, that one. Rushed through faster than most. Not illegal, just expedited. Real estate sign never even hit the lawn. The woman clicked her tongue and printed something from the terminal. Nothing you can't request. Back in the cottage, she studied the documents like a forensic accountant. Sale price, far below market. Signatory timeline, tight, hurried. Transfer agent, a notary from another county. Not damning, not yet, but it smelled wrong. That weekend, she took a long walk through the neighborhood. The same streets where she'd once biked to school, where her father had taught her how to parallel park in his rusted sedan. Most of the faces had aged, but the eyes were still the same. At the garden center, she ran into Mrs. Hanley, her old art teacher. Over pots of basil and starter lavender, they caught up. The conversation steered, as all small-town conversations eventually do, toward goings-on. And Mrs. Hanley, with a glance to make sure no one was listening, leaned in. I hope your mother's being careful, she said. He's charming, that one, but charm can be cheap. She learned that Eddie had renovated 3 houses in town in the past 5 years, all owned by single or widowed women. Each had ended up selling under value, moving into rentals, or leaving town entirely. No formal complaints, no lawsuits, just bad judgment, bad luck. At home, she began a list. Names, properties, timelines. Each line added weight to her suspicion. Still, it wasn't enough. Suspicion was wind. She needed roots. So she got strategic. Her next move was subtle. A quiet email to a local journalist, one she remembered from high school, now writing longer investigative pieces for the regional paper. She didn't give her name, just suggested a pattern. Check the property transfer history from 2018 to now, she wrote. Focus on single women, private sales, permits. She included the list of addresses and left it at that. She also began spending more time in town, especially near the places Eddie frequented. Hardware stores, the building permit office, the co-op cafe. Not to confront, not to be seen, just to watch. And when he greeted her with those patronizing smiles and over-friendly gestures, she returned them with polite civility, always polite. But behind the mask, her focus sharpened. She noticed things others ignored. Contractors showing up for jobs that hadn't been officially filed. Deliveries of materials to her mother's property that didn't match any work she was told about. Conversations at the permit office that ended too quickly when she walked by. She wasn't trying to ruin Eddie. Not exactly. She was trying to remove him like a tumor. Cleanly, precisely, leaving the surrounding tissue intact. The deeper she dug, the more threads she found. 2 unpaid contractor liens tied to shell companies, property values artificially suppressed through repairs that never actually passed inspection, and a registered LLC, EM Renovation Services, linked to a P.O. box and nothing else. It became clear. Eddie was good at making things look legitimate, but only just enough. He counted on small towns not asking too many questions. He fed on their assumptions. But assumptions could be turned. She began nudging the gossip network, selectively, anonymously. A chat with a florist about permits getting skipped. A tip to the librarian about a house that changed hands without a real appraisal. Each whisper was carefully planted, like seeds. Within a month, the town's tone had shifted. You could hear it in the half sentences people didn't finish. in the way Eddie's name began to show up in jokes with sharper edges. Her mother didn't say much, but the daughter noticed she'd stopped smiling when he entered the room. The laughter came less easily. Once, while washing dishes, her mother asked whether the cottage felt lonely. "It's peaceful," she answered. Her mother nodded, then looked out the window for a long time. The story wasn't breaking yet, but it was swelling, like water behind a dam, and she was still digging. By early fall, the journalist finally replied. The message was brief, but it said everything she needed. Looking into the pattern, "You're not the only one who noticed. Can we talk?" She didn't respond right away. Not because she was unsure, but because timing mattered. Let them chase a little. Let the facts breathe. In the meantime, she gathered more. Loan records, permit denials, quiet conversations with a friend of a friend who once subcontracted for Eddie and never got fully paid. From her end, she never confronted. She merely watched the town's eyes start to widen. It started with subtle things. A canceled renovation project on Oak Street. Then a city council meeting where Eddie's name came up, once, as a concern. A month later, the same hardware store that used to offer him a line of credit suddenly required prepayment. She never took pleasure in watching someone fall, but she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction the day she saw Eddie standing outside the permit office, gesturing in frustration, holding a folder of documents no one seemed interested in reviewing. Her mother, meanwhile, had grown quieter. One afternoon in October, her mother drove out to the cottage unannounced. No phone call. Just a knock at the door, her figure framed by the muted gold of changing leaves. They hadn't had a real conversation in weeks. They sat in silence for a few minutes before her mother finally asked, "Do you think I made a mistake?" The daughter took a long breath. "I think you trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not the same thing." Her mother didn't cry, but her voice cracked when she said, "It's just, after your father passed, I didn't know how to be alone." And that was the truth at the heart of it all. Loneliness, not foolishness, had made her vulnerable. The daughter didn't judge her for it, but she had no intention of letting that loneliness be exploited again. Around that time, the journalist published a piece. It didn't name Eddie directly, but the implications were impossible to miss. The article outlined a concerning trend. 3 property transfers, all involving elderly or widowed women, all tied to one local contractor. The story raised questions. A troubling pattern, it said. A failure of oversight. The online version included redacted permit forms, legal filings, and quotes from anonymous sources. The article spread like wildfire in a town where nothing ever happened. Suddenly, people started talking. Whispers turned into accusations. One of the previous homeowners, the widow from Maple Street, gave a quiet interview. No tears, just regret. "He was kind," she said, "until he wasn't." The daughter stayed out of it all. Her name was never mentioned. Her hands were clean, her posture neutral, but she watched closely. Eddie responded exactly as she predicted, defensive, dismissive, aggressive behind the scenes. He blamed disgruntled workers, claimed the women were exaggerating, said he had done nothing illegal. But legal and ethical are not the same thing. Within 2 weeks, Eddie's renovation jobs dried up. The contracts he'd boasted about quietly disappeared. And finally, her mother began to see it too. She asked fewer questions about where Eddie was in the evenings, stopped defending him when his name came up. One night, She asked if the daughter could help her find the deed to the house again. "Just to see," she said. "I want to understand what I signed." The document was simple, stark. Her name was gone. She stared at it for a long time. Then something shifted. Her mother didn't say much, but her morning routines returned. She planted mums, cleaned out the pantry, hosted bridge night again, and she stopped wearing the necklace Eddie had bought her last Christmas. The daughter didn't push. She let time do its work. But she noticed that every time her mother glanced toward the front door, she wasn't expecting anyone anymore. The town wasn't laughing behind Eddie's back. Not yet. But they'd stopped smiling to his face. His truck showed up less. His swagger started thinning at the edges. And the last time he passed the daughter on the street, he didn't wave. She didn't either. This was not the climax, but it was the turn, the space between erosion and collapse. And still, she waited. The final unraveling didn't happen with a bang. No screaming matches, no thrown suitcases. Just a series of quiet withdrawals, like tide leaving the shore. Her mother stopped returning Eddie's texts. Then she stopped leaving the porch light on. By November, his truck was parked in front of the house less frequently. When it was, the daughter noticed it didn't linger. The visits got shorter. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Eddie didn't make a scene. He wasn't stupid. He could feel the weather changing. In the town, in the woman, in the subtle chill that had entered the space where his charm once lived. The daughter didn't gloat. She kept to her routine. Grocery runs, walks with the neighbor's dog, occasional coffee with the journalist, always off the record. But beneath her calm, she tracked every move. She knew the work wasn't over, because men like Eddie don't vanish just because people frown at them in meetings. They go quiet, regroup, look for softer targets. One Saturday, she saw his name again, listed in a small-town newsletter for a neighboring county. Contractor offers free estimates on winter roofing. Different town, same pattern. No mention of his former projects. A blank slate. She didn't intervene. Not yet. But she saved the page. Back in town, her mother started reconnecting with old friends. It was slow, tentative. But something in her posture had changed. She was no longer reaching for someone to fill the space her husband had left. She was starting to stand in it herself. One afternoon, she invited her daughter over to the old house. The invitation was simple. "Help me trim the hedges?" It was the first time she'd been invited inside since the sale. The hedges weren't the only thing overgrown. The house had fallen into quiet disrepair. Gutters sagging, chipped paint along the windowsill, a faint mildew smell inside the back porch. Eddie had promised to fix it all once. But now that he was gone, the promises went with him. They worked in silence. Her mother offered lemonade. Her hands were rougher now. Not the soft, fragile hands of a woman being taken care of, but the hands of someone beginning to care for herself again. At one point, her mother said, almost casually, "I've been thinking about talking to a lawyer." The daughter paused, not wanting to push. Her mother continued, "Just to understand what my options are." It wasn't revenge. Not the loud kind. It was something slower, more enduring. A woman reclaiming her footing, one decision at a time. And the daughter? She just nodded. That week, the journalist published a follow-up piece, this time quoting a legal expert on elder financial manipulation. Still no names, but the comments section didn't need them. The town had drawn its own conclusions. The story started getting picked up outside their little county. Regional news. a podcast episode, a quiet stir. The daughter wasn't in any of them. She never would be. But she knew, and that was enough. When winter rolled in, she noticed something else. The old garden beds behind the house had been cleared, mulch laid, stakes marked for spring plantings. Her mother was preparing for a season she wouldn't see for months. A sign of hope, yes, but also one of strength. The contractor had taken the house, but not the soil. By the time spring arrived, the town barely remembered Eddie. His name had become a ghost, something whispered in caution, never allowed in praise. A former chapter, already fading in the next season's light. He didn't come back. Not for the house, not for her mother. Rumors floated that he had started over in a lakeside town, an hour north. But now, his name came with a cautionary tone. Landlords, double-checking references, customers asking more questions. Small ripples that followed him further than he expected. Her mother, for her part, moved with quiet dignity. She met with the lawyer, learned more than she let on. It turned out Eddie had never transferred full ownership, only partial stake through a trust, something he rushed her into signing, but never completed. That loophole would have protected him once, but now it worked in her favor. The lawyer advised a clean transfer, and she followed through. The house, once again, stood in her name. There was no announcement, no paperwork thrown in Eddie's face. He would find out eventually, but not from them. The daughter watched the process unfold, never pushing, never saying, "I told you so." She had said all she needed to without ever speaking it aloud. That restraint, it had become her sharpest tool. By mid-April, her mother asked if she'd help plant again. They started with tomatoes, then lavender, then climbing roses along the trellis, the same kind her father used to prune every year without fail. One day, while clearing the old compost pile, her mother found a small metal tag, rusted at the edges, a garden marker with her father's faded handwriting. Basil, 2006. She held it for a long moment, then quietly slid it into her pocket. Healing didn't look dramatic. It wasn't a grand gesture or a public confrontation. It looked like that small metal tag, worn by time, still legible. It looked like the way her mother started laughing again, not often, but deeply, when it came. It looked like the local paper running a feature on her garden 2 months later, calling it a legacy replanted. The daughter stayed in the cottage. She had no plans to leave. The town had softened somehow. So had she. Every so often, someone would mention Eddie in passing. A new town he'd moved to, a failed project, a rumor that he'd tried to start dating someone else's mother. But this time, there were eyes watching. Not just hers. The whole town had learned something. The daughter never claimed credit. She just watered the garden, paid her bills, replaced a fence post one afternoon, standing beside her mother in the light of early summer. No revenge had been spoken aloud, but justice had taken root. And under the climbing roses, everything was finally growing in the right direction.